you've then got the Ukrainians saying, right, if you're going to attack our grain facilities, we're going to treat the Black Sea as a zone of operation. And they've clearly developed some very effective means of hitting Russian naval forces. So each side tries to show that there's a cost to be paid by the other for its next step. And on it goes until hopefully we end up with some type of solution that is positive for Ukraine. I don't know the precise details, and what we do know is Russian forces have a long track record of attacking healthcare-related facilities. And I mean, going back to the Syrian war in particular, where they deliberately targeted hospitals, etc. It is a powerful way to undermine civilian morale. It has a military dimension as well when you're in the middle of a severe conflict. So it is entirely possible that it was a deliberately targeted attack. Of course, it's also possible that it was a successful shoot down of a missile or drone by Ukrainian forces that then landed there. Though I have to say, and there's been a lot of damage and death and destruction caused that way. But the specificity of this here does sound like it probably was a targeted attack.
It comes, of course, after Ukraine appears to be stepping up its attacks on Russian shipping in the Black Sea. What do you make of what's going on there? We've seen this quite dramatic footage, haven't we, of these remote sea drones attacking some of those Russian targets.
Well, it's part of the evolution of this awful, brutal, ongoing conflict. Each person counters the other person's attack. So we're in the second month, roughly, of a very slow-moving Ukrainian counteroffensive against Russian forces in at least 2 or 3 parts of the front line of Ukraine. And it's going slowly. But nonetheless, what you always want to do when you're defending, and the Russians now, you could argue, are sort of defending what they've gained, is to counterattack. Counterattacking on Kiev is not as successful as it was because the Ukrainians have deployed very effectively lots of anti-missile defense systems, whereas protecting the south, Odessa, some of those grain ports and shipping facilities, they're much less well protected. They're more vulnerable. So an effective way to try to both counterattack to the Ukrainian counterattack is to hit these grain facilities, which are very important for Ukrainian hard currency earnings at a time when its economy is vulnerable. And of course, hitting its energy facilities and so on is not as important. That'll be done in the winter. So you've then got the Ukrainians saying, right, if you're going to attack our grain facilities, we're going to treat the Black Sea as a zone of operation. And they've clearly developed some very effective means of hitting Russian naval forces. So each side tries to show that there's a cost to be paid by the other for its next step. And on it goes until hopefully we end up with some type of solution that is positive for Ukraine.
Because although there was a huge discussion about what this counteroffensive by Ukraine would result in, we've seen along that front line, along the east of the country, although there have been some villages and towns taken, not a huge change in where that front line is, partly because the Russians are so well dug in. But it does look as though the Ukrainians are now very much taking the attack to the Russians beyond Ukraine's own territory, onto the Russian fleet in the Black Sea, and of course those aerial drone attacks in Moscow.
Absolutely. And I think the way it's seen in Kiev is that as long as they can survive with the support of Western weaponry and Western material and economic and humanitarian support, then in a way they can use that base to try to shape the political environment under which Vladimir Putin is operating by taking the fight, as you said, into Russia proper, and to show to Russian citizens and to the Russian leadership, we can wait this out as long as you can. Remember, a critical part of Putin's strategy here is to say to the Ukrainians, you will never be able to take back what we have taken, and we can wait you out longer than you can wait out. Each side is trying to show to the other that they have the capacity to escalate and to survive. And I think it's incredibly important for the Ukrainians to show that this is a war that can affect all Russians. This idea that it's a special military operation, that it's not a war, which is what Vladimir Putin has been trying to say to his population, is being punctured by the drone attacks in Moscow, some of the cross-border incursions that took place involving Russian opposition groups, and then these attacks into actual ports on the Black Sea that are not part of Crimea, not part of Ukraine.
And in the meantime, we've got these peace talks, as they've been described, that have been hosted by Saudi Arabia, bringing together more than 40 different countries, including some who've been very much sitting on the fence in this conflict. I mean, even if they come up with a plan, is there any way that that could be implemented, given that Russia is not playing any part in this, and Ukraine is saying that its goal at the end of all of this is to take back all of its territory, including places like Crimea, that were taken almost a decade ago? Oh, we seem to have lost. We've got Robin back with you. Robin, I don't know if you heard that question. Well, what should we make of these discussions?
What should we make of it? Look, I think it is an important signal. The more it looks like this is going to be a long conflict, the more it looks like each side can drive the other to stalemate, then there is a huge interest globally, to be frank, to try to stop the war and to move it from a hot phase to, at the very least, an armistice or a ceasefire phase. I don't think anyone's talking about a peace agreement that would resolve the requirements of each side. As you noted earlier, the Ukrainian view is we need to get back all of our territory. And in fact, since the discovery of the awful, brutal human rights and war crimes that were committed around Bucha and Irpin in the early phase of the conflict in April, March, May 2022, the Ukrainians have said, we're not even interested in going back to the February 22 borders, which included parts of Ukraine that had been taken by Russia. We now want to take it all back. So remember, you've got the Ukrainians on a maximalist position and the Russians on a maximalist position as well, because Putin says, I'm not even going to start negotiating until Kiev accepts that all of those 4 provinces that we have conquered and annexed are recognized as part of Russia. So, I mean, the two sides as far apart as they can be. But I think what you've got in Jeddah is an effort by countries that are traditionally sympathetic to the Russian position, the Saudis in particular, trying to bring together other countries that have been relatively sympathetic to the Russian position. In Africa, there's a Chinese delegation there as well. And the fact that these are countries that have not always been critical of Russia, some have abstained the UN resolutions, means that they really can, I think, bring pressure on Russia in a way that the West cannot. So I think it's a very important development.
Robin Niblett, a distinguished fellow at Chatham House, the Institute's former director. Great to speak to you. Thank you so much.